This is the epicenter of evictions, moving from crisis to solutions in Contra Costa County. And I want to start by thanking our co-sponsors, the Raise the Roof Coalition, of which I'm a longtime member, as are many of our panelists, All Home, the regional solution to end homelessness, the Central Labor Council of Contra Costa, United Way Bay Area, and California State Assembly member Buffy Wicks, whom you'll hear from in just a moment. I'm really excited to say that we have almost 300 people that registered for this webinar. I think this high turnout shows the huge interest in solving our housing crisis and a recognition that all of us have a shared interest in ensuring that every resident in Contra Costa has access to housing that is safe, that is affordable, and that supports residents and families to thrive in their communities. We have a tremendous array of folks in the room today who share that interest. We have elected officials, government folks, community-based organizations, faith communities, and people and organizations that are involved in every aspect of solving our housing crisis, whether producing new housing, preserving existing affordable housing, protecting tenants trying to remain housed, or providing services and supports to our neighbors who are currently unhoused. You'll note that in this format, this webinar format, we don't have a chat box. That's because there's so many wonderful folks on this webinar. So instead, we have a Q&A box. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. We strongly encourage you to ask questions as we go along, as they occur to you, as you hear from the different speakers. We will do our best to answer many of them sort of in real time in the Q&A. And then if we have time, we're hoping to have about 10 minutes at the end for me to sort of moderate a discussion or, feeding questions to the panelists to answer. So again, we'll do our best to have this be interactive and to get you the information and answers that you need. I also want to note that a lot of the conversation today will mention something called an unlawful detainer, which is a legal term related to eviction and the courts. So one of my colleagues is going to put a definition of unlawful detainer into the Q&A space. So in case you're wondering what that is, you will have that information shortly to make sure we're all on the same page. It is now my distinct honor to introduce Assemblymember Buffy Wicks, who I imagine many of you know. Assemblymember Wicks has represented the East Bay and the California State Assembly since 2018. Her district spans communities from Oakland to Richmond. As chair of the Assembly Committee on Housing and Community Development, her work focuses on solutions to California's housing crisis, ranging from the production of housing to protecting tenants' rights and everything in between. She's a lifelong community organizer, and she previously served on both of President Barack Obama's campaigns and worked for him in the White House. She lives in Oakland with her husband, Peter, and daughters, Jojo and Ellie. Welcome, Assemblymember Wicks. Glad you're with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me and for everyone who jumped on the Zoom today. Looking at the participant list, and it's got a lot of great activists, advocates, troublemakers, and everything in between who are really going to help be a part of our solution here as we tackle this problem. Excited to be here with you all. I'm starting my 5th year in the Assembly, and really love working in partnership with many of you on this challenge. In addition to being in the Assembly, I happen to be the chair of the Housing Committee, which I've been for a little over a year now, and have spent a lot of time really grappling with this issue. And I'm very committed in my tenure here in the State Assembly to solving our homelessness crisis and our housing affordability crisis. And I think they are intertwined, those two crises that stem from historical racism, redlining, to NIMBYism, to the high cost of supplies, to all kinds of other things that contribute to the reasons why we are where we are. But I also think there are solutions to this problem, and I think protecting tenants is one of the most critical things that we can do. And we know that if we can do things like rental assistance, if we can do things like legal resources for tenants, that we can really stop the homelessness before it even happens. And keeping folks in their home is the best way that we can end homelessness. Sounds very simple, but it's the thing that we really need to focus on. I'm proud of the partnership created between the Contra Costa County and the state to help protect tenants during COVID-19. during the work that we were doing then. You know, I know Contra Costa distributed about $224 million in housing is key dollars, but now we know that the eviction moratorium and the rental assistance programs that we'd put in place then have ended. And we know that still far too many families are on the brink right now of potentially experiencing homelessness because of the challenges that are being faced with. So we all have to lean in and really solve this problem. It's of particular concern because we know that this issue disproportionately impacts people of color and women. Disproportionately, it's people of color becoming homeless, becoming housing insecure, and it's women that we know we need to ensure that we're working extra hard to really try to level that playing field and create the kind of equity that we know that we need. I view housing as one of the biggest issues in the state. It drives so many other things. And so it's a critical issue. So I know this report is robust. It's such good work by a strong coalition of folks, many of whom I've worked with over the years. The needs to, you know, create a tenant right to counsel so that our low-income tenants don't have to face eviction protections. There's really strong data showing the efficacy of this and its ability to really keep people housed. We know that investing in rental assistance is key. I had a big bill last year that would create a huge fund for affordable housing, about $100 billion for 10 years. The bill didn't get out, but we're going to continue to work on that to create that funding. And part of that funding is both in housing production, but also in key rental assistance. Again, we want to stop folks from becoming housing insecure. So rental assistance can help, especially when you have far too many people that are one, you know, broken down car away from being evicted, and don't have the resources to stay on their feet if there's some sort of even minor emergency in their family. We know we need to continue to honor and pass and build up stronger, more robust tenant protection laws that keep our tenants in their home. And we also know that we need to make eviction data more readily available. For 4 years, I've tried to pass a bill called a rental registry to just have an understanding of where are evictions happening, where do we see rent increases, rent decreases, just basic data for policymakers and advocates to have at their disposal to be able to make sound public policy to protect people. And so those are things that I'm going to continue to work on. We face some pretty entrenched interests in Sacramento, but working in partnership, I know that we can create the change that we need. I'm just super happy to be a part of this. So appreciative to all the people on the call and to everyone here on the Zoom for all the work that you do. And please look to me as a resource. Please hold my feet to the fire on all the important things. And I want to continue to be an ally with you all working arm in arm to solve this really important challenge that we know that our communities face. So again, appreciate it very much and happy to send it back.
Assemblymember Wicks, thank you so much for that. We hear the passion and we hear the expertise and the attention to detail and the care that you bring to housing issues and especially in protecting tenants. So we see you and appreciate you and thank you for your time today. We know you have to go on to your next meeting, but we're really glad you spent a few minutes with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, it is now my pleasure to introduce the first of our panelists that you will hear from today. We have an incredible array of experts from all angles of this tenant protection need and issue. And we're going to move first to those who are in the streets and in the courthouses on the ground, doing that incredible work to help folks in real time stay housed and to challenge and change and witness the system that keeps them from easily doing that. So we'll have two folks we'll hear from next. The first is Betty Gabaldon. She's a tenant organizer at the East Bay Alliance for a Sustainable Economy, or EBASE. She was an official tenant alternate on the Concord Residential Rent Review panel from April 2018 to November 2018. Her personal experience with landlord harassment, retaliation, and eviction has inspired her to directly support and advocate for Concord tenants. In 2019, she partnered with others and founded the Todos Santos Tenants Union to educate tenants about their rights and to stand up for dignity and respect. After her will be Jennifer Morales, who is a first-generation Central American raised in the Bay Area and the lead community organizer at Monument Impact, where she focuses on organizing Concord tenants. She previously organized food service workers with Unite Here to demand better wages, benefits, and respect in the tech and hotel industries. While she loved that work, Jennifer's own tenant experience led her to want to organize renters to fight back against an industry that does not believe it is a human right to have a roof over one's head. We will start with Betty Gabaldon. Betty, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Betty Gabaldon, and I work as a tenant organizer at East Bay Alliance for a Sustainable Economy, EBASE. And let me just share really briefly how I got involved in tenant organizing. I think Mariana already said that, but let me just say it real quick. I'm a renter in Contra Costa County, and 5 years ago, I received a 6-day notice from the property owner as a form of retaliation because I spoke up and organized my neighbors to action. I self-evicted and I did not go to court. This type of evictions are really hard to keep track of since they don't go through the court system, and which is the case in most evictions. And this experience was really traumatic for me to be uprooted from my community and really find it impossible to find housing. So for the last 5 years, I had been providing direct support to tenants and advocating for them. And last year, in the wake of the pandemic, I witnessed an increased numbers of evictions and unlawful detainers, or UDs. Our hotline was flooded with calls from tenants who had received unlawful detainers and they needed help. And we realized that we didn't know what was happening in the courtrooms, and it was really hard to get information about these evictions from courts. So just to see firsthand what was happening in Contra Costa County courthouses, volunteers and staff of EBASE, EPHO, FAME, and Monument Impact launched an eviction court program to observe the eviction courts. All participants in the Court Watch program and I myself were trained and assisted by Leah Simon Weisberg in the ACE Institute. So from May to mid-October 2022, we observed a total of 56 UD trials at the 3 courthouses, Richmond, Martinez, and Pittsburgh. After each trial, we completed a survey to capture as much data as possible, including the names of the people involved, if they had any lawyers, and also the alleged reason for the eviction. We started with the Richmond courthouse, and the process was very confusing and very intimidating. The entire proceeding was conducted in complicated legal terms that we even had to ask the attorney who trained us to come to court with us and help us make sense of this whole process. We then moved to Martinez. We focused on Martinez and Pittsburgh because most of the evictions were happening there. And once we got to Martinez, it was very chaotic since most of the action was taking place in the hallway and behind closed doors. We observed landlords' attorneys that will go back and forth between the benches and talk to their clients and then run out with the tenants. The tenants seems lost without the attorneys. They were actually forced to navigate a complicated and frightening legal proceeding during this eviction process. For example, we observed a woman in her 80s who lived on a trailer park and was waiting for her the COVID rental assistance. She came to court with only handwritten notes, but had no smartphone, no computer, and the commissioner refused to accept her notes as evidence. So they gave her a second trial date. When she returned the second time with some evidence, this time the landlord's attorney argued the tenant had failed to pay for her rent. So the lady explained that she tried to do so, but the manager refused to take her rent payment. And she even had a video as evidence, but did not bring it with her. So without this legal representation, she really lacked the resources to mount what could be a really strong case defense. And in Pittsburgh, for example, another tenant had their water cut off for 44 days. He actually acknowledged that he was required to pay for the water, but explained that the landlord had refused to transfer the account into his name, so he withheld his rent. And however, at the end, he was evicted for non-payment of rent. if he would have an attorney, he might have been able to fight this eviction because of it was an illegal form of harassment. Even the court staff began asking us to help tenants. We accompanied tenants to look in for the in-court services that were founded by the county. We tried to document everything that was going on. We tried to document what was going on in mediation, but it was very hard because it was close to the public. And this is something that my colleague Jennifer will talk about next. At the end, we all desire fairness and justice from our legal system, and our Court Watch program just revealed that there is no due process and fairness when tenants are not represented, especially when the stakes are so high and family lose their homes and they can be pushed into the streets. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Betty. Next, I want to turn it over to Jennifer Morales
Great.
to share her
Thank
story
you.
and her experiences. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Morales, the lead tenant organizer with Monument Impact. Before I begin, wanted to give a quick shout out to the rest of the community engagement team, Tony Bravo, Shagufa Khan, Jose Cordon, Vanessa Chena, who also partook in the Court Watch program. But yeah, before I begin sharing the experience, I did want to share some facts. The county funds tenant and landlord mediation. So when tenants arrive at court, they're approached and urged to attend mediation rather than have trial. And so we noticed that mediation often leads to settlements that require the tenant to move out. But unlike unlawful detainer trials or UD trials, the court considers mediation private, like Betty mentioned. So while mediation leads to a lot of evictions, it's almost impossible to know how the process works and whether or not it's fair. I was able to attend one mediation session because a tenant asked me to accompany her. I've also spoken with other tenants and other tenant lawyers who did mediation in order to understand what goes on behind closed doors. And based on this data, we concluded that without equal access to legal representation, mediation maintained the power imbalance between tenants and landlords. And so the following was my experience in the mediation session. So the tenant arrived with her 2 kids and her mother. I quickly realized I knew who she was because we actually went to middle school together in Redwood City, California, and she was actually displaced from Redwood City to Concord. And so I went up to her to ask her why she was here, let her know that we were doing Court Watch. And she let me know that she was here to do mediation actually with her landlord regarding missed rent from April to July. And while this was happening, her landlord's attorney kept coming up to the tenant, intimidating her, letting her know how much money she owed in rent. She kept crying, letting him know that this was not fair. And then after all that commotion, the tenant then asked me if I could sit in with her mediation for emotional support. And so during the mediation, I observed 3 things. One was that the mediation began with the landlord first. Second, the tenant let the mediator know that uninhabitable conditions she was living in. The landlord only hired people to address said issues, but they only came to inspect and nothing was ever fixed. The mediator asked if she had brought proof, but the tenant let her know that she was actually unaware that today was her trial and had left her proof that she had compiled at home. Her landlord had brought this version of the proof. As a reminder, he did come with an attorney at hand. And lastly, the tenant then let the mediator know that she applied for rental assistance from a local church to pay the rent she owed, but the landlord had declined it and had asked her for the tenant to personally pay it instead. As organizers, we were informed that the courts were supposed to take this into consideration if landlords declined rental assistance or didn't inform tenants of this assistance. The tenant did have email proof of this, but was told instead that the landlord could decline charity. Towards the end of the mediation session, the tenant was proposed by the landlord and his attorney a 12-month payment plan to pay back $7,628.25, which meant she would pay $635 a month. And just a reminder that the tenant had to move out and she still has to pay rent on top of this new payment plan. And also a reminder, she had the rental assistance funds to pay it off, but the landlord declined it. So the tenant ultimately had two choices, which was agree to this plan or have a mediation go to trial. And so the tenant was told this deal was a better option than what the judge or the commissioner would decide upon based upon the facts presented. And so the tenant ended up choosing the payment plan. And before the tenant signed off on the stipulation, I had asked the mediator if the eviction would be masked under the stipulation, as there was no mention of this. Right after it was mentioned, the mediator ran to the landlord to check if that would be all right. And the eviction, after all, would be masked if she made all the payments. And so overall, as you can see, without attorneys on the tenant side, tenants are at a structural disadvantage in navigating the mediation and court process, especially when 86% of landlords come into this process with an attorney. If tenants don't have an attorney at hand, it's incredibly hard to navigate mediation and or the court trial, as it can be restrictive and can be harmed by the process. And yeah, that was the experience that I had during that mediation process. I'll pass it over to Mariana.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Betty. I just want to note to the audience that it's so traumatic to be in this system, even as an advocate, and let alone as a tenant. So please just pause and imagine for a minute what it's like to be running around to courtrooms and not sure what you're doing and have no one to help you navigate. It's real. It is now my pleasure to introduce Alex Werth. He is the Policy and Research Advisor at the East Bay Alliance for a Sustainable Economy. He is actually the author of the report that I hope you all have read or will read. That is the basis for this webinar. It's called Unrepresented, a report on eviction court watch in Contra Costa County, which is what he's going to talk about today. He's formerly the policy manager at East Bay Housing Organizations, or EBHO, and he's been involved in advocating for tenants' rights and resources in Contra Costa County since 2020. He holds a PhD in urban geography from UC Berkeley. Alex, thank you so much for your work on this report and on this webinar, and welcome.
Thank you, Mariana. Yeah, so I'd like to zoom out for a minute before kind of delving back into what's happening at court. First slide, please. So what we've seen repeatedly is that throughout the pandemic, Contra Costa has unfortunately had either the highest rate of eviction or the second highest rate of eviction out of any Bay Area county. And the most recent data that we've seen, which is pictured here on the slide, is that as of July 2022, Contra Costa led the region with 358 eviction filings and counting. And I think that the picture is actually even more concerning than what we see here, because Contra Costa has half as many renter households as Santa Clara County, which was the county with the next most evictions. So on a per capita basis, Contra Costa's eviction rate is actually quite high. Next slide, please. Same thing with homelessness. During the course of the pandemic, we saw that Contra Costa experienced the largest increase in homelessness of any Bay Area county. And these two things are integrally related. How do we know that? Well, the county's own 2020 point in time count found that 25% of unhoused residents identified the cost of living or loss of a job, and 17% identified eviction as their primary cause of homelessness. And these were the two leading responses to the survey question. So there is definitely an eviction to homelessness pipeline in Contra Costa. Next slide, please. The chart that you see here is based off of, it's a little bit dated, but it's based off of the data that we received from the Housing is Key program on the number of Housing is Key rental assistance applicants who were reported facing eviction at the time of application. And this is broken down by supervisorial district. So what you see is that over 7,000 renter households in Contra Costa reported facing eviction. And two, that evictions disproportionately impact East and West County, areas with large numbers of low-income renters, immigrants, and people of color. Demographically, to put an even finer point on it, the universe of people that we're talking about here, the people who applied to ERAP, this universe was consisted of 86% people who were very low income, 69% people of color, and 58% women. So getting really good data on who's impacted by eviction is generally hard, but this kind of gives a pretty good sense of the disproportionate impacts. Next slide, please. Sticking with that ERAP data, or the Housing is Key data, 3,500 households went a step further and said that they actually requested to be contacted by a tenant legal service provider because they were really concerned that they had housing security issues that the rental assistance money alone were not going to solve, right? So that's a pretty large number, 3,500 households. But it's even more concerning when you take into account that Contra Costa only has 4 legal aid organizations, only 2 that can serve families in Central and East County, as opposed to, let's say, seniors, and only 1 that can serve undocumented families in Central and East County. So we're talking about a number of attorneys that you can literally count on one hand. So while there may be many causes of the eviction to homelessness pipeline, the gap in tenant legal services is definitely one. Next slide, please. So in terms of what we found in the eviction court watch process, I want to talk about a few quantitative findings and a few qualitative findings. Quantitatively, of the 56 UD trials that were observed, we found that 86% of landlords were represented by an attorney, as opposed to only 7% of tenants. 41% of tenants were Black, even though only 16% of renter households in the county are headed by Black residents. 57% of tenants were women alone. And on the landlord side, 50% were corporations or shell companies rather than individuals. And I should say that all of these statistics track very closely with what has been found in national studies or studies from other US metro areas. Next slide, please. On the qualitative side of things, the first key finding is that clearly there were not enough legal services for tenants. And if I could put an even finer point on it, I would say there's a massive disparity in terms of access to legal representation. We've already heard about some of the ways in which the legal eviction process is just very fast-paced and hard to navigate. Quite simply, there are just so many places in which a low-income person can get tripped up, really in which any person can get tripped up. And it's a process that is really not well understood other than by tenant and landlord attorneys, which is why landlords so often make sure to go to court with an attorney. You really need help in order to navigate the process. That said, what we found is that in Contra Costa, there were no in-court legal services for tenants. And so as a result of all of this, tenants who alleged serious abuses by their landlords, they were evicted, regardless of the merits of their case, because they quite simply didn't know how to mount their defense on their own. Betty already referred to some of the really concerning allegations, like refusal to accept rental assistance or rent payment, refusal to turn on utilities. These are the kinds of things that really very well could mount a valid defense. But as we've heard, a lot of tenants show up on the day that their UD is called. They don't even know that a decision is going to be made that day. So the upshot is that tenants really need legal services to receive due process and a chance to stay in their home. Next slide, please. The second finding was that while Contra Costa County did invest in limited court-based services to mitigate displacement in the post-pandemic period, the post-moratorium period, those services did not actually prevent eviction or homelessness. Rather than invest in tenant legal service and fast-acting rental assistance, the kind of things that intervene immediately upon the problem, instead the county invested in referrals for legal aid and rental assistance, as well as tenant-landlord mediation. One tenant who we spoke to put this really bluntly when he said that what he got was a referral to a referral, right? He was in court because he was facing a UD that day, and when he went to go look for assistance, the contractor provided him a piece of paper with a phone number to call for another housing organization that wasn't actually a tenant legal service organization. That organization would also then need to refer him to a legal service provider. So there was a mismatch in terms of the timing of things and the services that were available. And tenants weren't able to receive the legal assistance they needed because the county contractors were not actually lawyers. And as a result, they were barred from providing legal advice. So the upshot, tenants need integrated legal aid and rental assistance programs that are designed to intervene early and also be a backstop in court in order to either stop evictions or avert homelessness. Next slide, please. And our third finding was that the court really pressured tenants to participate in mediation without providing legal services. I won't go into this too much because Jennifer just spoke to it really beautifully. But what I will say is that what we observed is that the court is deeply invested in moving tenants into the mediation process. There were tenants who arrived at court not knowing what mediation was and were asked by 4 different individuals whether or not they wanted to go to mediation. So tenants were definitely feeling some pressure there. As Jennifer mentioned, mediation, in the absence of equal access to representation, mediation maintains an existing power imbalance between tenants and landlords. It may be a useful intervention, but again, without tenant legal services, it's hard to make that intervention kind of actually fair between the parties. Next slide, please. So I won't reiterate these in too much detail because actually Assemblymember Wicks already mentioned what our 4 top-line recommendations are. So I won't repeat them all here. You can see them for yourself. We'll learn a little bit more about a few of these, like tenant right to counsel, from the following speakers. But I did just want to say, in terms of making eviction court data, a regularly available part of the policymaking process, I think we can all agree that the findings that I've just talked about, the findings that are in the report, are really of the interest to the community and of the interest to the county. And it shouldn't really take the concerted efforts of a lot of tenant organizers and strapped community-based organizations to kind of bring some of these things to light. So we would really like to see the county and the court collaborate in the future in order to, bring forth the data that we as a community need in order to move towards housing solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, so much for your expertise, your hard work, and your presentation. And you just delivered an incredible wagon barrow full of data and context, which really, oops. I did not unmute myself. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Alex, for that presentation. It was very detail packed and very helpful in terms of providing further context and data on the situation in Contra Costa. Next, we're going to hear from two speakers who are experts in Alameda County and San Francisco County, respectively. First, we'll hear from Monique Berlanga, and she is the Executive Director of Centro Legal de la Raza, an organization that protects and advances the rights of immigrants, workers, and tenants in the East Bay. She has represented low-income tenants in the region for 10 years, previously serving as Managing Director of the Eviction Defense Center and Directing Attorney of Centro Legal's Tenants' Rights Practice. During the pandemic, she also helped stand up Alameda County's Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which was managed by Centro Legal. Monique is from Hayward, and she will talk about what's happening in Alameda County that Contra Costa is looking at with great interest and hope in terms of a potential model. Monique, welcome.
Hi, thank you. This is a fantastic event. Thank you so much for bringing everybody together to have this important conversation. So we can go ahead and jump in. If I can get the slides up, please. You can go ahead and advance to the next one. Great. So I want to talk a bit about what has been happening in Alameda County, particularly the Alameda County Housing Secure Program, which was first established in 2018. So if you could go back one slide, please, actually. Okay, so I'll take you back to pre-Alameda County Housing Secure 2017. At that time, the eviction defense capacity in Alameda County was probably somewhere between 4 to 6 attorneys, right? So you figure 4 to 6 attorneys can handle maybe 200 to 300 cases out of the 5,000 unlawful detainers filed per year in Alameda County. So very similar to what we are seeing right now in Contra Costa in terms of capacity to provide legal services for tenants being evicted. Next slide, please. In 2018, in partnership with Alameda County Housing and Community Development Department, Centro Legal helped to stand up the Alameda County Housing Secure Program with our partners, East Bay Community Law Center, Bay Area Legal Aid, Housing and Economic Rights Advocates, and the Eviction Defense Center. The county invested $3.5 million in boomerang funds over 3 years to establish the eviction prevention program. Centro Legal is the fiscal lead, again, in partnership with our county's HCD. Next slide, please. So to tell you a bit about the program, the collaborative developed a coordinated strategy within which we use an array of tools to help our most vulnerable community members attain housing security. We like to say that there's a continuum of services that the program provides to educate residents about their rights, provide consultations so residents know how their rights apply in a specific situation, and then provide the legal resources for them to actually be able to access and enforce their rights. We do this through outreach, know your rights education, legal consultations to address issues that have not yet risen to the level of an eviction to try to prevent them from getting to the point of an eviction. And of course, legal representation for residents facing eviction or foreclosure. And lastly, short-term emergency financial assistance for clients receiving legal services to assist them with housing costs such as rent or mortgage payments, which allows us to quickly stabilize the housing, prevent the immediate loss of housing, and reduce the risk of future loss of housing. The program also funds a courthouse clinic to provide day of legal services for tenants. Next slide, please. Another key component of the program is the peer-to-peer referral system. So this is a back-end system which is used by all of the partner legal service providers to do internal referrals, right? As one of the organizers mentioned, tenants and homeowners in crisis often struggle to navigate the maze of services available. So we have a Salesforce-based platform, which is a shared referral system that creates a no wrong door system to access legal services. Over 1,000 referrals to date have been made using our system. The strength of the program is that each of the agencies provides a specialized service based on geography, age of client, subject matter, type of housing. And the internal referral system ensures that residents don't have to go door to door amongst agencies to find the right provider. If a participant contacts an agency and it's not the right agency to meet their needs, the agency will make the internal referral to another provider within the program who will then affirmatively contact the tenant. Next slide, please. So this just shows you some of the numbers in terms of clients served. Over 2,400 tenants have been served since the inception of the program via legal consultations and representations. And of the clients who received legal representation, over half have stayed in their homes, and then the remaining tenants were able to negotiate more time, money, or other resources to cushion their move. Next slide, please. Emergency financial assistance. So this has been such a game changer for those of us defending evictions in Alameda County. The program, Alameda County HCD, is able to give Centro Legal large chunks of emergency rental assistance in advance so that we have those there. So we're able to quickly and efficiently approve rental assistance applications for our partner legal services providers who are representing tenants. To date, over 282 families have stabilized their housing through the program. We've dispersed over $2 million, $2.2 million in flexible financial assistance. And the average award is to a tenant family to stabilize their housing is $4,808. And I just want to say what an impact a small amount of money like that can make. What a tenant lawyer can do with that $4,800 is go to court. We can settle the eviction case. We can make sure that in that settlement agreement, repairs are going to be made. We can make sure any unlawful rent increases are remedied. We can say, you know, this tenant's lease is now extended to 3 years, you know, maintaining the preserving the housing stability long-term, all with just that small chunk of money in the hands of a tenant attorney who's able to work with the tenant. 100% of the recipients contacted in the follow-up survey reported that they've stayed in their homes. And just to end this slide, integration of rental assistance with legal services makes both more effective. Attorneys ensure that payments are fair, making rental assistance go farther, and rental assistance creates more opportunities to keep tenants in their homes. Because the most important component piece is that in order for one of these applications to be granted for rental assistance, the tenant attorney must resolve the housing instability, right? So as part of the settlement agreement, the housing must be preserved. Any additional rents that are not eligible to be paid must either be waived or there must be some type of payment plan, and it really goes a long way. Next slide, please. Who are we reaching? So the collaborative is targeting assistance to the most marginalized county residents, which also corresponds with the demographics most likely to experience displacement and homelessness. Next slide, please. Expansion. So over the years, as the program has expanded, additional jurisdictions within our county and within the state have added in additional resources so that we can add more staffing to the program, right, across each of our partner organizations, while the county funding still continues to fund the backbone and the infrastructure of the program and the financial assistance and the internal referral system, et cetera. Next slide, please. So bring you to today. Legal services capacity has increased significantly since 2018. Right now, we estimate there are about 27 eviction defense legal aid attorneys in our county, which roughly translates to more like 1,000 tenants being represented in evictions across the county per year, which has been a huge change. Because the county has funded the infrastructure of this program, our partner agencies, as well as our agency, has been able to focus on expanding programmatic capacity, adding lawyers, right? If the county's funding the infrastructure and the rental assistance and is providing long-term contracts to each of our agencies, so we're able to go out and obtain funding from other sources to really expand our program capacity. And you can see the ripple effect that this has had by this initial county investment across our county. Next slide, please. So again, having this infrastructure of partner tenant legal services providers with expanded capacity really put us in a position where we were able to respond quickly and efficiently when the pandemic hit, and we're able to transition the program into our county's ERAP program. We took all of our partner service providers, added in more agencies, and partnered with our county to make sure that rental assistance was administered in the best way possible. Next slide, please. We were also able to add in a prevention tool into the emergency rental assistance program, where we asked every tenant who applied for rental assistance about their housing stability. So we were able to connect them with resources, know your rights information, et cetera, through the ERAP application process. Next slide, please. And this just is some data which is available on our website about the amount of rental assistance already approved. Next slide, please. And so last, I'll just leave you here because I'm running out of time with some of our key lessons learned. So targeted legal representation has led to hugely successful efforts in preventing homelessness for those most at risk of experiencing homelessness in our county. Coordination of service providers leads to better services and the ability to pivot to meet community need. But this has required a crucial investment in administrative capacity, which we are very fortunate to have our county support. Targeted legal representation, targeted legal rep has led to successful outcomes. Tenants and homeowners facing housing insecurity often have needs beyond what can be addressed by legal services. So there continues to be a need for integrated, coordinated social services as well. And lastly, there's a great need for more flexibility in rental assistance funds to more effectively address barriers to access housing. And then I think actually I'll do one more slide, if that's okay. Wanted to just say, we are now working at Sector Legal, partnering with our county to move into the next phase of the Alameda County Housing Secure program, where we expand the program to add in additional partner legal services providers to help with legal first aid and to expand tenants' rights workshops, et cetera, to continue to leverage, expand our capacity beyond what just legal services can provide so that we can meet the demand for tenant legal services and eviction defense in our county post-moratorium. So be on the lookout for Alameda County Housing Secure 3.0. We're very excited to continue to partner with our county to prevent evictions. Thank you.
Monique, thank you so much for that lightning tour through the very complex and it sounds like very effective system in Alameda County. And thank you and your team for your leadership with all of your partners in making it happen. Our last speaker on the panel today, and then we'll go to Q&A. So if you have questions that are burning and you want to put them in the Q&A box, now would be a good time to start doing that if you haven't yet. Okay, so I am going to introduce Hugo Ramirez, who is Community Development Program Manager, the San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. In partnership with the community-based organizations who carry out the work, he helps lead San Francisco's eviction prevention and housing stabilization programs, including a tenant right to counsel, tenants' rights counseling, education and outreach, mediation, and rental subsidy programs. He actually lives here in Contra Costa in Concord with his husband and his rescue dog. Hugo, welcome. Glad you're here.
Thank you, Mariana. Well, let's dive right in. This will be a very high-level presentation. The City and County of San Francisco also has a comprehensive prevention system. I know that Alex had also presented our most recent homelessness numbers, and you may have seen that San Francisco was among those unique counties that saw a decrease in homelessness, and partially attributable to our prevention efforts. So next slide, please. So I will be focused on our tenant right to counsel program, which was the result of a 2018 ballot measure, Prop F, or the No Eviction Without Representation Act of 2018. Implementation began in 2019. It's important to note for my peer government officials on the call that the ballot measure did not create a new revenue source, that the funding for the program is subject to the mayor and board of supervisors budget process. But I'm really proud to share that our elected leaders have committed full funding to the program in this current fiscal year. It's also important to recognize, and again, I don't have time in this presentation to really share with you all of the community-based organizations that are responsible for the work. And the fact that this program is rooted in the innovation of San Francisco's legal aid and tenant advocacy communities. The forerunner of this program, an Attorney of the Day program, started in San Francisco back in 2005. Mari McKeever, Carrie Gold, who's now a judge in our Superior Court, and others were really the visionaries in the legal aid community and certainly San Francisco's robust tenant advocacy community. So the city began funding eviction defense in San Francisco about 10 years ago. We have 10 legal services organizations that carry out the work, and it's all done again in coordination with our tenant advocacy organizations, with our financial assistance programs, and as you may have seen in my bio, homelessness prevention and anti-displacement is a coordinated effort in San Francisco. So I work very closely with my counterpart in our homelessness department. And in fact, our emergency rental assistance program is a joint program, which is, I think, unique and effective, as you'll see. So just really quickly, Prop F mandates universal access to full scope legal representation. There is an exception for tenants who reside in the same unit as their landlord or master tenant, but that represents probably less than 1% of evictions in San Francisco. It's also important to note in terms of potential funding sources, I'm talking CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, and other programs designed to serve low-income tenants or low-income households, I should say. It's a slam dunk program. 95% of all tenants facing eviction are low income, and the vast majority are extremely low income. So it's a really compelling intervention. Next slide, please. So talking about efficacy, as Assemblymember Wicks made it very clear in the beginning, and other speakers, other panelists, legal representation gets results. It's so compelling. And an added bonus of having a universal program in San Francisco, for example, at our rent board, landlords are not required to file eviction notices for non-payment, which is the leading cause of all evictions in any community. So we don't have full data at the rent board. And then we all know also that the Superior Court system, that their data and technology vary from county to county. But because we have a universal program that serves virtually every tenant facing eviction, we have really rich data to inform our decision making on a program level, on a policy level, resource allocation, et cetera. Of course, it reduces the power imbalance between landlords and tenants, thereby incentivizing landlords to seek compromise solutions that preserve housing stability for tenants. It advances racial equity and homelessness prevention and anti-displacement goals. As you'll see in our kind of demographic slide, it really is a predominantly Black and brown phenomenon, right? Black and brown San Franciscans are overrepresented in evictions. It's also cost effective. It creates these safety net cost savings. Any report that studies it will show at least 3 to 6 times a return on investment. And not to mention other policy impacts like workforce preservation, right? Our community needs a strong, working class, and that's difficult to have if they're not in your community. And also for the Superior Court itself, it's a separate branch of government, co-equal, and it improves court operations and services for all litigants, landlords and tenants. So from their perspective, it makes for a more efficient court operation because you have legal practitioners that are operating within the court, not traumatized, overwhelmed tenants. And it's also not just for big cities and counties with robust tenant advocacy. You'll find right to counsel programs in local and state communities, in local governments and states, Oklahoma, Ohio, Minnesota, Kentucky, etc. Next slide, please. So efficacy, right? So in one study, tenants receiving full scope legal representation, and so that just means that they had an attorney during the entire legal process, which again is very difficult to navigate if you're not an attorney. These tenants stayed in their homes 3 times as often as those receiving limited or no legal assistance. In San Francisco, that disparity isn't as dramatic, but it's still very compelling. It's 2 times as often because our other services that are not full scope are still very extensive legal services. So we have really strong outcomes in San Francisco. And when tenants did have to move, they were given twice as long to do so. And that's the larger study. In San Francisco, it's even more compelling than that in terms of time and money. That also reduces homelessness because folks are given, again, more time, more resources to land on their feet. Next slide, please. So 2/3, 1/3, it's really easy to think of kind of the San Francisco model in this way, in that it reflects our success rate and also kind of the breakdown of who gets full scope and who gets other legal services. So in San Francisco, 2/3 of tenants facing eviction stayed in their homes if they received full scope legal representation, whereas only 1/3 of tenants who stayed in their homes when they received less than full scope legal representation. Again, with the caveat that even their outcomes were more significant than if they hadn't received legal services. Also, while our mayor and board of supervisors have committed to fully funding our tenant right to counsel program, it takes time to ramp up, right? We have more than 40 staff attorneys across our legal services organizations. We still need to fill another 10 plus positions. And so we're currently providing full scope legal representation to 2/3 of tenants who need it. And the other third is receiving limited scope legal representation during the pretrial mandatory settlement conference. Everyone gets help with the initial response so that they get their day in court. So 2/3, 1/3, easy to remember. And I believe my last slide, or one of my last slides, here you can see the overrepresentation of Black and Brown San Franciscans. For example, Black San Franciscans make up less than 6% of our total population, yet almost a quarter of tenants facing eviction. So that's awful. But I will also share with you that Black San Franciscans who receive legal representation have the highest success rate in staying in their home, more than 80%. So that's on the bright side. That's a strong outcome. And then finally, I believe, yes, that's it. So we're in this together. Your success is our success. And so for the government and funder colleagues of mine on the call, as well as the community-based organizations, I'm here to support you, to share our learnings here in San Francisco. We most certainly would learn from you as well. Here's my contact information. And I, of course, have checked in with Martina and Ora at the Eviction Defense Collaborative, our lead partner for our Tenant Right to Counsel program. Martina actually, who lives in Alameda County, was at Centro, as a tenant defense attorney. And Ora Prokhovnik, brilliant director of litigation and policy, longtime law professor in Contra Costa County, actually. And so they are legal aid leaders. So, the three of us would be more than happy to support other communities in the region in standing up their tenant right to counsel program. So thank you.
Hugo, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your successes, and congratulations on your work. I also want to lift up that it's so important to share information and ideas and models across counties and regions, and I'm so appreciative that that's happening today. Thank you both, Monique and Hugo. And thank you to all of our panelists as well. We have about 5 minutes left, so we're going to try to squish in a couple of questions, and we're going to bring up our panelists so you can see them. We do have a couple of questions, and I also want to say, actually the very first question, a lot of folks asking whether the slides and this recording will be shared. The answer is absolutely yes, and you're welcome to and encouraged to send it out to everyone you know. This is how we learn and grow and act together to move closer to equity in our respective communities. Also, since we have so little time for questions in this live session, we are going to capture and document all of the questions that were not answered. And it'll be probably a few weeks, not immediately. We will put together sort of a Q&A sheet that we will then send out to everyone who registered for this webinar. So just to know there's more information coming soon and then in a little bit. And thank you so much for all the questions you're asking. Okay, so I'm going to call on I think Alex for this question. It's about mediation. So there's a lot of questions and interest in understanding who runs the Day of Court mediation program in Contra Costa. Are the mediators volunteers? Are they trained? And the role of mediation in the process. And you're welcome to answer that, or if you suggest someone else, I'm happy to direct it elsewhere. But can you just kind of quickly explain the role of mediation in this process?
Well, I can give some very basic facts about mediation in Contra Costa, and then I'm wondering if maybe Monique from her kind of litigation experience can talk about the role of mediation in the eviction process more generally. So in Contra Costa, the county contracts with an organization called the Congress of Neutrals, which provides specialized mediation services in a lot of different fields. In this case, for unlawful detainer cases in particular, the mediators, as I understand it, are historically they were volunteers. I think that they're now stipended, but it's basically people from the community who are interested in, I think, very well-meaning, certainly, want to see a more fair and balanced process and just help with conflict resolution, right? So they are they're trained. I think that they're trained extensively. I can't say from personal experience to what extent that training covers the ins and outs of tenants' rights, which, because of the nature of their role, they're not actually really meant to advocate for anyhow, but certainly they receive extensive training in conflict resolution and aspects of the unlawful detainer process. But maybe I can turn it over to Monique to build on that.
Yeah, I think it's less about an individual mediator or, the intent, but it's that underlying power imbalance. When a tenant walks into court and they've never spoken to an attorney, they're not able necessarily to assert their rights because they may not know them. They don't have the evidence. They don't have, they're not prepared for a trial in the way that most landlords who have an attorney are already prepared. They've got their evidence packet. They're coming in and there's just not a level playing field, right? So the tenant's walking in, to an uneven playing field and will often sign an agreement that they don't understand. We often see tenants who later then come to our office and they've signed away critical rights, or they've agreed to move when they've got solid defenses. And how would a tenant possibly know without an attorney and without an underlying set of basic rights for that attorney to enforce? So I think our position is that without right to counsel and without strong tenant protections, mediation is not a good option for tenants in general.
Thank you both very much. And our last question, unfortunately, not the last of all the questions, but the last we can ask today with all of us here. And I'm going to direct this to Betty and or Jennifer, which is, what are the top 3 things that tenants should be doing before or during eviction before they get to court?
Do you want to go, Jenny? I guess for me, one of the main things that we saw that we observed in court is that tenants, they come unprepared. A lot of the times they bring the evidence with them, but it's in their phone. And that's one of the things that I tell the tenants, make sure you print everything out, whatever evidence you have to bring to court, bring it already printed out, because once you get to court, you don't have the chance to look at your phone and find that. I guess, like we said earlier, the tenant only has 5 business days to respond to that. And it's very important for the tenant to respond to that, to the unlawful detainer, and then contact an attorney. They could amend the answer, and whatever they're missing, whatever they need, the attorney could help them with that. And that, that would be Centro Legal if they have a problem like that. I don't know, Jenny, do you want to?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I usually do it in 3 steps. First is when you get served this packet of paper, usually at your home, you have 5 business days, like Betty said, to fill this in. If you're not able to contact, let's say, Centro Legal at the time, I always tell people to fill it in as much as they can. I believe Shelter Inc. does have a self-help center that also kind of helps with that as well. But I tell tenants to fill it in as much as you can, because you can amend it later. So after turning it in, the second step I usually tell them is to call Centro Legal. I believe they prefer an email. I'll give the contact information to Christy and she can put it on the chat. But after getting that, they'll call you back and they can help amend the UD that you answered. And then the third step is getting all that proof. I've always told tenants, like, if you're a tenant, as long as you're a tenant, or if you're moving into a new space, like, avoid verbal conversations with your landlord regarding repairs or anything revolving your tenancy, because you're going to want proof. So that could be like the one time that we did, Aura actually helped represent one of the tenants that Betty and I and a former organizer, Nicole, helped. She told us that we had to basically collect all the proof for this tenant, and we had to put it in what is it? chronological order from like when the harassment started, right? And thankfully that tenant had everything. And so we had to sit there for like a week putting all this together and making 3 different folders. And it's a long process, right? But we wouldn't have known that without having that legal representation for that tenant, right? And so it's super important that, yeah, the tenants have that proof. So that's why I always say avoid verbal conversations like, hey, can you come fix the pipes burst? Can you come? No, like, no, have that in writing.
Thank you both very much. And on that note, we started and we're ending on the experience for the tenants and those who are working with them, and seems very appropriate. I'd like to thank all of our presenters, all of our sponsors, and every one of you on this webinar and who will watch it later. We're very, very excited that so many folks in this county are really committed to learning more and hopefully doing more and being in action about crafting solutions together. We will send some follow-up information, as I said, sooner. On the screen right now, there are some resources available for folks who need help themselves or want to help a neighbor or friend. You will get all the slides in the follow-up information. So we're at time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks again to our panelists. Take good care. We'll be in touch.